Welcome to Sinister Memory. If you're new here, subscribe now and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story. Let's get to today's story. The autumn of 1892 brought with it an unseasonable chill that seemed to settle permanently over the Yorkshire countryside, as if nature itself had grown weary of the secrets buried beneath its rolling hills. It was during this melancholic season that the estate of Ravenshollow Manor came under the scrutiny of the Crown's investigators, following circumstances so peculiar that even the most seasoned officials of Her Majesty's service found themselves questioning the boundaries between documented fact and the realm of the inexplicable. The initial discovery came through the meticulous work of Mr. Reginald Fairfax, a solicitor from Leeds whose reputation for thoroughness had earned him the unenviable task of settling the affairs of deceased persons whose estates presented unusual complications. Fairfax had been summoned to Ravenshollow following the death of its owner, Lord Percival Ashworth, whose passing had been as sudden as it was mysterious. The nobleman had been found in his study on a September morning, seated at his mahogany desk with his eyes fixed upon a collection of documents that would later prove to be the catalyst for one of England's most disturbing investigations. Among these papers, carefully preserved in a leather portfolio bound with black ribbon, lay the personal correspondence and journal entries of one Mary Linnett, a young woman whose name appeared nowhere in the official records of the county, yet whose presence seemed to permeate every corner of the manor like a persistent shadow. The documents, written in an elegant feminine hand that betrayed both education and an increasingly unstable mental state, chronicled a descent into obsession so complete that it challenged the very foundations of rational thought. Mary Linnett, as revealed through her own writings, had arrived at Ravenshollow Manor in the spring of 1891 as a governess to Lord Ashworth's ward, a position that should have provided her with modest comfort and respectable employment. The early entries in her journal painted a picture of a woman grateful for her circumstances, possessed of a sharp intellect and an appreciation for the finer aspects of literature and natural philosophy. Her observations of the manor's extensive library and its collection of rare botanical specimens suggested a mind capable of both scholarly pursuit and aesthetic appreciation. However, as the weeks progressed, a subtle transformation began to manifest itself within the pages of her correspondence. Letters to her sister in Manchester, initially filled with descriptions of her duties and the manor's grandeur, gradually shifted in tone and content. Where once she had written of her charge's progress in Latin and mathematics, she began to focus increasingly upon the manor itself, describing its architecture with an intensity that bordered on reverence. The building, she wrote, seemed to possess a consciousness of its own, responding to her presence in ways that defied conventional explanation. The journal entries from this period revealed an even more troubling development. Mary had begun to document what she described as conversations with the manor, recording detailed accounts of messages she claimed to receive through the creaking of floorboards, the whisper of wind through the corridors, and the play of shadows across the walls. These communications, according to her increasingly frantic handwriting, contained instructions of a most specific nature, directing her to perform rituals that would strengthen her connection to the house and ensure her permanent residence within its walls. Dr. Algernon Whitfield, the physician who had attended Lord Ashworth during his final months, provided additional context through his own carefully maintained records. The doctor's notes described a household in which the normal rhythms of daily life had been gradually subverted by the governess's increasingly erratic behavior. Staff members had reported finding her in various rooms throughout the manor at all hours of the night, standing motionless before mirrors or windows, her lips moving in silent conversation with unseen presences. The most disturbing aspect of Dr. Whitfield's observations concerned the effect of Mary's condition upon her young charge. The child, previously described as bright and inquisitive, had begun to exhibit signs of profound distress, speaking of nightmares in which the governess appeared as a figure of terrible authority, commanding obedience to forces that existed beyond the realm of human understanding. These episodes had prompted Lord Ashworth to consider dismissing Mary from her position, a decision that, according to the evidence subsequently uncovered, may have precipitated the tragic events that followed. As Fairfax continued his examination of the documents, the true scope of Mary Linnett's obsession began to reveal itself through a series of architectural drawings and floor plans, each annotated with symbols and notations that suggested a mind attempting to decode some hidden meaning within the very structure of Ravenshollow Manor itself. The architectural drawings discovered within Mary Linnett's possession represented a level of obsessive detail that defied rational explanation. Each sheet of parchment, covered in precise measurements and intricate symbols, revealed her attempt to map not merely the physical structure of Ravenshollow Manor, but what she had come to believe was its spiritual anatomy. The drawings, executed with the skill of a trained draftsman despite her background in education, suggested countless hours spent in clandestine exploration of the manor's most hidden recesses. Fairfax's examination of these documents revealed that Mary had somehow gained access to the original blueprints of the manor, dating back to its construction in 1743. However, her annotations transformed these historical records into something far more sinister. Where the original architect had noted structural supports and room dimensions, Mary had added her own observations: point of convergence, threshold of communication, and sacred geometry manifest. Her handwriting, initially neat and controlled, grew increasingly erratic as the drawings progressed, suggesting a mind gradually surrendering to forces beyond its comprehension. The most disturbing aspect of these architectural studies lay in their accuracy. When compared against the actual structure of Ravenshollow Manor, Mary's measurements proved to be precise to the inch, despite the fact that many of the areas she had documented were sealed chambers and forgotten passages that had been closed off for decades. The manor's current housekeeper, Mrs. Beatrice Thornley, confirmed through her testimony that several of the rooms depicted in Mary's drawings had been inaccessible since her own arrival at the estate 15 years prior. Among the architectural documents, investigators discovered a series of letters addressed to various antiquarian societies and occult researchers throughout England. These correspondences, never sent but carefully preserved, revealed Mary's desperate attempts to understand what she perceived as the manor's supernatural properties. She had researched the history of the land upon which Ravenshollow stood, uncovering records that traced its ownership back through centuries of noble families, each of whom had met with mysterious misfortunes that seemed to follow a disturbing pattern. The pattern Mary had identified centered around the manor's unique architectural features, particularly its unusual number of mirrors and the specific angles at which its corridors intersected. Her research had led her to conclude that the building had been designed according to principles that predated conventional architecture, incorporating elements that she believed facilitated communication with otherworldly entities. The evidence she had compiled, while circumstantial, painted a picture of deliberate design that went far beyond mere aesthetic consideration. Dr. Whitfield's medical records from this period documented a marked deterioration in Mary's physical condition that corresponded with her deepening architectural obsession. The physician noted significant weight loss, chronic insomnia, and a peculiar sensitivity to light that forced her to conduct much of her research during the darkest hours of the night. Her hands, once soft and appropriate to her station, had become calloused and stained with ink and charcoal from her constant drawing and note-taking. The governess's behavior during daylight hours had become increasingly mechanical, as if her consciousness existed primarily during her nocturnal explorations. Staff members reported that she fulfilled her educational duties with competent efficiency, yet seemed to regard her young charge with a distant, almost clinical detachment. The child's lessons had gradually shifted from traditional subjects to more esoteric topics, including geometry, astronomy, and what Mary described in her notes as the mathematics of spiritual architecture. Lord Ashworth's personal diary, discovered in a locked drawer of his desk, provided additional insight into the household's growing unease. The nobleman had begun to notice subtle changes in the manor's atmosphere that coincided with Mary's research activities. Rooms that had always felt welcoming now carried an oppressive weight, and the building's familiar sounds had taken on an ominous quality that left him questioning his own perceptions. The most troubling entry in Lord Ashworth's diary described an incident in which he had discovered Mary standing in the manor's central hall at 3 a.m, surrounded by her architectural drawings spread across the floor in a complex pattern. She had been tracing the lines of the drawings with her finger while moving her lips in what appeared to be silent recitation. When he had attempted to approach her, she had turned toward him with eyes that seemed to reflect an intelligence that was not entirely her own. The investigation revealed that Mary had begun to modify her living quarters according to the principles she had discovered in her research. Her bedroom had been rearranged to mirror the geometric patterns found throughout the manor, with furniture positioned at specific angles that corresponded to her architectural calculations. The walls had been covered with her drawings, creating a visual representation of her growing obsession that transformed the space into something resembling a shrine to the building itself. The transformation of Mary Linnett's quarters into what could only be described as a ceremonial chamber marked the beginning of the most disturbing phase of her obsession. The room, once a modest governess's accommodation, had been systematically altered according to principles that seemed to blend architectural precision with ritualistic purpose. Every piece of furniture had been repositioned to create specific geometric relationships, while the walls themselves bore intricate chalk markings that formed complex patterns extending from floor to ceiling. Mrs. Thornley's detailed account of her discovery of these modifications provided investigators with their first glimpse into the true extent of Mary's psychological deterioration. The housekeeper had entered the room to deliver fresh linens, only to find herself confronting a space that no longer resembled any conventional living quarters. The bed had been moved to the exact center of the room and elevated upon a platform constructed from books taken from the manor's library. Surrounding this central point, Mary had arranged mirrors at precise angles, creating a network of reflections that seemed to multiply the room's dimensions infinitely. The books supporting the makeshift platform represented a carefully curated selection from Lord Ashworth's extensive collection. Investigation revealed that Mary had chosen volumes dealing with sacred geometry, medieval architecture, and what contemporary scholars would have classified as natural philosophy. Among these texts were several rare manuscripts that had been acquired by previous owners of Ravenshollow, including a 13th-century treatise on the spiritual properties of architectural proportion and a collection of alchemical diagrams that bore striking similarities to Mary's own drawings. The chalk markings covering the walls defied immediate interpretation, combining mathematical symbols with designs that appeared to draw from various esoteric traditions. Dr. Reginald Ashcroft, a professor of comparative religion from Oxford, who was consulted during the investigation, identified elements that seemed to reference ancient Celtic symbols, medieval Christian mysticism, and what he described as possibly pre-Roman ritual practices. The precision with which these markings had been executed suggested not only extensive research, but also a level of artistic skill that Mary had never previously demonstrated. The most unsettling aspect of the room's transformation lay in its effect upon those who entered it. multiple witnesses, including Dr. Whitfield and several members of the household staff, reported experiencing profound disorientation within the space. The arrangement of mirrors created visual distortions that made it difficult to determine the room's actual dimensions, while the geometric patterns seemed to shift and move when observed peripherally. Several individuals reported feeling as though they were being watched by unseen presences, despite the room's obvious emptiness. Mary's journal entries from this period revealed the methodical nature of her preparations. Each modification to the room had been planned according to calculations derived from her architectural studies, with specific attention paid to the relationship between the room's geometry and the manor's overall structure. She had determined that her quarters occupied a position of particular significance within the building's design, serving as what she described as a focal point for the manor's spiritual energies. The governess had begun to document what she believed were communications received through the modified environment of her room. These messages, recorded in increasingly frantic handwriting, contained detailed instructions for rituals that would supposedly strengthen her connection to the manor's otherworldly inhabitants. The rituals themselves involved complex sequences of movement and positioning that corresponded to the geometric patterns she had created, suggesting a belief that physical action within the space could facilitate supernatural communication. Lord Ashworth's growing concern about Mary's condition was evident in his correspondence with his physician and legal advisors. The nobleman had begun to notice that the governess's nocturnal activities were affecting the entire household, with staff members reporting disturbed sleep and unsettling dreams that seemed to center around the manor itself. The building's atmosphere had grown increasingly oppressive, as if Mary's modifications to her room were somehow influencing the entire structure. The investigation uncovered evidence that Mary had begun to extend her ritualistic preparations beyond her own quarters. Chalk markings similar to those in her room had been discovered in various locations throughout the manor, always placed in areas that corresponded to significant points in her architectural drawings. These markings appeared to form a network connecting different parts of the building, suggesting that Mary viewed the entire manor as a single, complex ritual space. Dr. Whitfield's medical observations during this period documented a further deterioration in Mary's physical condition, accompanied by what he described as an almost supernatural vitality during her nocturnal activities. The physician noted that while she appeared increasingly frail during daylight hours, witnesses reported seeing her moving through the manor's corridors at night with an energy and purpose that seemed to transcend her apparent physical limitations. The preparation phase of Mary's obsession culminated in the creation of what appeared to be a master diagram, combining all of her architectural research into a single, comprehensive design that encompassed the entire manor and its surrounding grounds. The master diagram that emerged from Mary Linnett's obsessive research represented the culmination of months of architectural study and supernatural investigation. Drawn upon a massive sheet of parchment that she had somehow procured from the manor's archives, the design encompassed not only the building itself, but extended to include the surrounding gardens, outbuildings, and even the ancient stone boundaries that marked the estate's perimeter. The diagram's complexity suggested a mind that had moved far beyond conventional understanding of space and structure into realms that challenged the very foundations of rational thought. The parchment itself bore the watermark of a London paper manufacturer, dating its creation to 1743, the same year as the manor's construction. How Mary had gained access to this historical document remained a mystery that troubled investigators, as Lord Ashworth's estate records contained no mention of such materials being stored within the manor's archives. The paper's age and condition suggested that it had been preserved under specific circumstances, as if it had been waiting for someone with Mary's particular obsession to discover its potential. Upon this ancient canvas, Mary had overlaid her comprehensive vision of Raven's Hollow Manor as what she termed a living architectural entity. The design incorporated every detail from her previous studies, but arranged them according to principles that seemed to transform the estate into a single, massive ritual instrument. Lines of force connected various points throughout the property, creating geometric patterns that pulsed with an almost organic rhythm when viewed in their entirety. The diagram revealed that Mary had identified what she believed to be energy nodes throughout the estate, points where the building's spiritual properties were most concentrated. These locations corresponded to architectural features that had previously seemed merely decorative. The positioning of certain windows, the angles of specific corridors, and the placement of ornamental elements that now appeared to serve a far more sinister purpose. Her calculations suggested that these nodes could be activated through precise ritual actions, transforming the entire manor into what she described as a gateway between worlds. Investigation of the estate's historical records revealed disturbing correlations between Mary's identified energy nodes and locations where previous tragedies had occurred. The library, where Lord Ashworth's grandfather had been found dead under mysterious circumstances in 1834, appeared as a major convergence point in Mary's design. The tower room, where a previous governess had disappeared without explanation in 1867, was marked as what Mary termed a threshold of transition. Each location that featured prominently in the manor's dark history had been incorporated into her master plan with mathematical precision. The diagram's most unsettling aspect lay in its treatment of the manor's human inhabitants. Mary had included detailed notations indicating the optimal positioning of individuals within the estate's various rooms, as if the building's residents were components in a vast supernatural mechanism. Her young charge was assigned a specific location in the nursery that corresponded to what she described as a focal point of innocence, while Lord Ashworth's position in his study was marked as an anchor of authority. Most disturbing of all, Mary had designated herself as the primary conductor, positioned at the exact center of the estate's geometric network. The technical precision of the master design suggested that Mary had somehow acquired knowledge far beyond her educational background. The mathematical calculations underlying the diagram demonstrated familiarity with advanced geometric principles and architectural engineering that would have challenged even trained professionals. Dr. Ashcroft's analysis revealed references to construction techniques and spiritual practices that predated the manor's official construction by several centuries, suggesting that Mary had uncovered information about the site's pre-Christian significance. Mrs. Thornley's testimony revealed that Mary had begun to implement aspects of the master design throughout the estate. The housekeeper reported discovering chalk markings in locations that corresponded precisely to the energy nodes identified in Mary's diagram. These markings appeared overnight, suggesting that the governess was conducting her modifications during the darkest hours when the household was asleep. The markings themselves seemed to glow with a faint luminescence that was most visible in complete darkness, creating an eerie network of light that connected various parts of the manor. The implementation of Mary's design began to produce measurable effects upon the estate's environment. Lord Ashworth's diary documented a series of atmospheric disturbances that coincided with the appearance of the chalk markings. Temperatures in certain rooms fluctuated without apparent cause, while others maintained an unnatural consistency regardless of external weather conditions. The manor's mirrors began to reflect images that did not correspond to their actual surroundings, showing glimpses of rooms and corridors that seemed to exist in a parallel version of the building. The master design also revealed Mary's ultimate intention, the complete integration of her consciousness with the manor's supernatural properties. Her notations indicated that she believed the building possessed a form of awareness that could be accessed through proper ritual preparation and geometric alignment. The events of October 13th, 1892, would forever remain etched in the memory of those who witnessed them, though their testimonies varied so dramatically that investigators struggled to construct a coherent narrative of what had transpired within the walls of Ravenshollow Manor. The night began with an atmospheric disturbance that seemed to emanate from the building itself, as if the very stones had begun to resonate with some otherworldly frequency that defied natural explanation. Mrs. Thornley's account, recorded 3 days after the incident, when she had recovered sufficient composure to provide testimony, described the evening as beginning with an unusual stillness that settled over the estate like a shroud. The normal sounds of the countryside, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the trees, the occasional call of nocturnal birds, had ceased entirely, leaving the manor isolated in a bubble of absolute silence that seemed to press against the windows and doors with almost physical weight. The first indication that Mary's preparations had reached their culmination came shortly after midnight, when the household staff reported seeing lights moving through the manor's corridors in patterns that corresponded precisely to the geometric designs found in her master diagram. These lights, described as having a bluish-white quality unlike any conventional illumination, seemed to flow along the walls and ceilings as if following invisible pathways that had been carved into the building's very structure. Lord Ashworth's final diary entry, written in a hand that grew increasingly unsteady as the night progressed, documented his growing awareness that something fundamental had changed within his ancestral home. The nobleman described feeling as though the manor had awakened from a long slumber, its consciousness stirring in response to Mary's ritualistic preparations. The building's familiar creaks and settling sounds had been replaced by what he characterized as a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Dr. Whitfield, who had been summoned to attend to Lord Ashworth's deteriorating health, arrived at the manor during the height of the disturbance. The physician's clinical observations provided the most detailed account of the supernatural phenomena that unfolded throughout the night. He documented temperature fluctuations that defied physical laws, with certain rooms becoming so cold that breath became visible, while others maintained a tropical warmth that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. The mirrors throughout the manor began to exhibit properties that challenged the fundamental nature of reflection. Instead of showing the rooms in which they were positioned, they displayed images of spaces that existed nowhere within the building's actual architecture. These phantom chambers appeared to be inhabited by shadowy figures that moved with purpose and intelligence, as if conducting their own mysterious activities in a parallel version of Ravenshollow Manor. Mary herself had become the focal point of the supernatural convergence, positioned at the exact center of the manor's main hall in accordance with her master design. Witnesses described her as standing motionless with her arms extended, her body serving as a conduit for the energies that flowed through the building's geometric network. Her appearance had undergone a transformation that went beyond mere physical change. She seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, her form occasionally becoming translucent, while her eyes reflected depths that suggested consciousness far beyond human limitations. The young charge under Mary's care had been discovered in the nursery, positioned precisely as indicated in the master diagram. The child appeared to be in a state of suspended animation, breathing so slowly that life could only be confirmed through the faintest pulse. Most disturbing of all, the child's eyes remained open throughout the ordeal, reflecting the same otherworldly intelligence that had manifested in Mary's gaze. As the night progressed, the boundary between the manor's physical structure and its spiritual properties began to dissolve. Walls became permeable to those who understood the geometric principles that Mary had discovered, allowing passage through solid stone and timber as if they were mere illusions. The building's rooms seemed to rearrange themselves according to supernatural logic, with corridors leading to destinations that bore no relationship to the manor's actual floor plan. The climax of the convergence occurred in the pre-dawn hours, when the accumulated energies reached a crescendo that threatened to tear apart the fabric of reality itself. The manor's windows blazed with light that was visible for miles across the Yorkshire countryside, while the building's foundations trembled with vibrations that registered on seismographic equipment as far away as Leeds. In the aftermath of this supernatural storm, investigators would discover that Mary Linnett had achieved her ultimate goal: complete integration with the consciousness of Ravenshollow Manor. Her physical form had vanished entirely, leaving behind only the geometric patterns that marked her transformation from human governess to something far more enigmatic and eternal. The dawn that followed the night of convergence brought with it a silence so profound that it seemed to have weight and substance of its own. Ravenshollow Manor stood unchanged in its physical appearance, yet those who approached the building reported an immediate sense that something fundamental had been altered within its walls. The very air surrounding the estate carried a quality that made breathing difficult, as if the atmosphere itself had been charged with an energy that human lungs were not designed to process. Mrs. Thornley, the first to venture into the manor after the supernatural storm had subsided, discovered a scene that would haunt her remaining years. The main hall, where Mary had positioned herself as the focal point of her ritualistic convergence, bore no trace of the governess's physical presence. The geometric patterns that had been chalked upon the floor remained perfectly intact, but they now seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence that was most visible in the early morning shadows. The patterns appeared to have been burned into the stone itself, creating permanent markings that no amount of scrubbing could remove. The investigation team that arrived from London 3 days later, led by Inspector Roderick Mansfield of Scotland Yard, encountered phenomena that challenged their understanding of criminal investigation. The inspector's official report, filed with considerable reluctance, documented evidence that defied conventional explanation. Footprints that belonged to no living person continued to appear throughout the manor, following paths that corresponded to Mary's architectural diagrams. These impressions materialized in dust and appeared on surfaces that had been thoroughly cleaned, suggesting the presence of something that existed beyond the physical realm. Lord Ashworth's condition had deteriorated dramatically following the night of convergence. Dr. Whitfield's medical examination revealed symptoms that bore no resemblance to any known ailment. The nobleman's eyes had acquired a reflective quality similar to that observed in Mary during her final transformation, and he seemed to respond to stimuli that were invisible to others. His behavior suggested awareness of presences within the manor that remained undetectable to conventional observation, as if he had become partially attuned to the supernatural consciousness that now inhabited the building. The young charge, who had been positioned in the nursery during Mary's ritual, emerged from the experience fundamentally changed. The child, previously described as bright and inquisitive, now exhibited an unsettling maturity that seemed inappropriate for someone of such tender years. The child's drawings, when examined by Dr. Ashcroft, revealed knowledge of geometric principles and architectural concepts that far exceeded normal educational development. Most disturbing of all, these drawings bore striking similarities to Mary's own work, suggesting that some form of knowledge transfer had occurred during the convergence. The manor's mirrors continued to display images that bore no relationship to their actual surroundings. These reflections showed rooms that existed in what appeared to be an alternate version of Ravenshollow, populated by figures that moved with purpose and intelligence. Among these shadowy inhabitants, witnesses occasionally glimpsed a form that bore resemblance to Mary Linnett, though transformed beyond easy recognition. This figure seemed to serve as a guide or conductor for the other entities, directing their movements according to patterns that mirrored the geometric designs found throughout the building. The estate staff began to report encounters with what they described as Mary's continuing presence within the manor. These manifestations took various forms: the sound of footsteps in empty corridors, the rustle of papers in rooms where no documents were present, and the sensation of being observed by unseen eyes. Most unsettling of all were the occasions when staff members discovered their work had been completed by invisible hands, with tasks performed according to standards that exceeded human precision. Inspector Mansfield's investigation revealed that similar phenomena had been reported at other locations throughout England, all of which shared certain architectural characteristics with Ravenshollow Manor. These buildings, constructed during the same historical period and designed according to similar geometric principles, had become focal points for supernatural activity that seemed to be coordinated from a central source. The evidence suggested that Mary's transformation had somehow activated a network of spiritually significant structures, creating a web of otherworldly influence that extended far beyond the Yorkshire countryside. The official investigation was quietly suspended after 6 weeks, when it became clear that conventional methods of inquiry were inadequate to address the supernatural elements of the case. The authorities' decision to classify the matter as a case of mysterious disappearance, rather than acknowledging the true nature of Mary's transformation, reflected their inability to process evidence that challenged the fundamental assumptions of rational investigation. The manor itself began to exhibit signs of architectural evolution, with new passages appearing overnight and existing rooms reconfiguring themselves according to principles that defied structural engineering. These changes seemed to follow the logic of Mary's master design, suggesting that her consciousness continued to guide the building's development from within its supernatural framework. The months following Mary Linnett's transformation witnessed a phenomenon that would challenge the very foundations of Victorian society's understanding of reality. Reports began to emerge from across England of similar supernatural disturbances occurring at estates and manor houses that shared architectural characteristics with Ravenshollow. These incidents, initially dismissed as hysteria or coincidence, formed a pattern so consistent that even the most skeptical investigators were forced to acknowledge the existence of something beyond conventional explanation. The first documented case occurred at Greystone Hall in Derbyshire, where the estate's governess, Miss Adelaide Fortescue, began exhibiting behaviour remarkably similar to that observed in Mary's final weeks. Miss Fortescue had discovered architectural drawings hidden within the manor's library, diagrams that bore an uncanny resemblance to those created by Mary, despite having no apparent connection to Ravenshollow. The governess's subsequent obsession with the building's geometric properties followed an identical progression, culminating in her mysterious disappearance during a night of supernatural disturbance that left the estate permanently altered. Dr. Ashcroft's comparative analysis of these incidents revealed disturbing correlations that suggested a coordinated supernatural influence operating across vast distances. The affected buildings had all been constructed during the same historical period, designed by architects who had studied under the same master builder, a mysterious figure known only as Magister Geometricus, whose true identity remained lost to history. The architectural principles employed in these structures incorporated elements that seemed to facilitate supernatural communication, creating a network of spiritually active buildings that spanned the length and breadth of England. The Royal Society's secret investigation into these phenomena, conducted under the direction of Professor Algernon Wickshire, uncovered evidence that the network of affected buildings had been deliberately designed to serve as components in a vast supernatural mechanism. The geometric relationships between these structures created patterns that were only visible when viewed from a perspective that encompassed the entire country. These patterns suggested that the buildings served as nodes in a network designed to channel and focus otherworldly energies according to principles that predated Christian civilization. Lord Ashworth's deteriorating condition provided investigators with their most direct insight into the nature of Mary's continuing influence. The nobleman had begun to speak in languages that no scholar could identify, reciting what appeared to be architectural instructions that corresponded to modifications being made to manor houses throughout England. His words, when transcribed and analyzed, revealed knowledge of construction techniques and geometric principles that had been lost for centuries, suggesting that he had become a conduit for information flowing through the supernatural network. The child who had been present during Mary's transformation exhibited increasingly disturbing abilities that seemed to grow stronger with each passing week. The young ward had begun to demonstrate an intuitive understanding of the geometric principles that governed the supernatural network, creating drawings that accurately depicted the locations and architectural features of buildings hundreds of miles away. These drawings often showed details that the child could not possibly have known through conventional means, including hidden chambers and secret passages that were subsequently discovered by investigators. Mrs. Thornley's detailed observations of the manor's continuing evolution provided crucial evidence of Mary's ongoing influence over the building's structure. New rooms appeared overnight, their architecture perfectly integrated with the existing structure despite the impossibility of such rapid construction. These additions followed the logic of Mary's master design, creating spaces that seemed designed to facilitate supernatural communication and ritual activity. The rooms contained furnishings that materialized from unknown sources, arranged according to geometric principles that created environments optimized for otherworldly interaction. The network's influence began to extend beyond the architectural realm into the social and political spheres of Victorian society. Families residing in the affected buildings reported experiencing shared dreams and visions that seemed to coordinate their actions according to a higher purpose. These experiences created a sense of unity among the network's inhabitants that transcended conventional social boundaries, suggesting that Mary's consciousness was working to establish a new form of collective awareness that operated according to supernatural rather than human principles. Inspector Mansfield's continued investigation revealed that the phenomenon was not limited to England, but extended to similar buildings throughout Europe and the Americas. Reports from correspondents in France, Germany, and the United States described identical patterns of supernatural activity occurring at estates that shared the same architectural heritage. The global scope of the network suggested that Mary's transformation had activated a system that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for someone with the proper knowledge and obsession to serve as its catalyst. The most disturbing aspect of the spreading influence lay in its apparent intelligence and purposefulness. The supernatural activities occurring throughout the network seemed to be coordinated according to a master plan that was gradually revealing itself through the accumulated evidence of individual incidents. The final chapter of Mary Linnett's transformation revealed itself not through dramatic conclusion, but through the gradual understanding that her obsession had achieved something far more profound than mere supernatural manifestation. The network of architecturally connected buildings had evolved into a living system that operated according to principles that transcended the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms. Mary's consciousness, no longer confined to human limitations, had become the guiding intelligence of a vast supernatural organism that spanned continents and centuries. Professor Wickshire's comprehensive analysis of the global phenomenon revealed that the network possessed characteristics typically associated with biological systems rather than architectural structures. The buildings communicated with each other through methods that defied conventional understanding, sharing information and coordinating activities across vast distances with a precision that suggested conscious intelligence. The geometric patterns that Mary had discovered were not merely decorative elements, but functional components of a communication system that operated on frequencies beyond human perception. The investigation's most startling discovery came through the examination of historical records dating back to the original construction of these buildings. Documents hidden within various estate archives revealed that the mysterious Magister Geometricus had been more than merely an architect. He had been the leader of a secret society dedicated to creating a network of structures that could serve as anchors for otherworldly consciousness. Mary's obsession had not been the beginning of the phenomenon, but rather its culmination, the activation of a system that had been waiting for centuries to find someone with the proper combination of intelligence, obsession, and spiritual sensitivity. Lord Ashworth's final transformation occurred on Christmas Eve, 1892, when his consciousness joined Mary's within the supernatural network. The nobleman's physical form dissolved in the same manner as his former governess, leaving behind only the geometric patterns that marked his integration into the building's spiritual architecture. His disappearance was witnessed by Dr. Whitfield, who reported that the process appeared to be voluntary, as if Lord Ashworth had finally understood the true nature of his ancestral home and chosen to become part of its eternal purpose. The child who had served as an unwitting participant in Mary's ritual underwent a different form of transformation, one that allowed retention of physical form while gaining access to the network's collective consciousness. This hybrid existence provided investigators with their only direct source of information about the network's true purpose. Through careful observation of the child's behavior and analysis of the continuing stream of architectural drawings, researchers began to understand that the network served as a bridge between human civilization and forms of consciousness that existed beyond terrestrial limitations. Mrs. Thornley's decision to remain at Ravenshollow Manor, despite the supernatural phenomena, provided crucial continuity for the ongoing investigation. The housekeeper's detailed records of the building's continuing evolution documented the emergence of architectural features that seemed to serve no conventional purpose, but facilitated increasingly complex forms of supernatural communication. Rooms appeared that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their geometry shifting according to the needs of their otherworldly inhabitants. The network's influence on Victorian society became increasingly apparent as more individuals connected to the affected buildings began to demonstrate enhanced abilities and knowledge that exceeded normal human limitations. These individuals, while retaining their physical forms, served as conduits for information flowing through the supernatural system. Their contributions to various fields of study, from mathematics to natural philosophy, suggested that the network was actively working to advance human understanding in directions that served its mysterious purposes. Inspector Mansfield's final report, submitted to authorities who would immediately classify it as too sensitive for public release, concluded that Mary Linnett's obsession had succeeded in creating something unprecedented in human history, a permanent bridge between the material world and realms of existence that operated according to entirely different principles. The network represented not a threat to human civilization, but rather its next evolutionary step, a transformation that would gradually reshape society according to patterns that transcended conventional understanding. The legacy of Mary's transformation continued to manifest in ways that defied prediction or control. New buildings constructed according to conventional architectural principles began to exhibit supernatural properties when positioned at specific geometric relationships to the existing network. The phenomenon suggested that the system possessed the ability to expand and evolve, incorporating new structures into its spiritual architecture through processes that operated beyond human comprehension. As the 19th century drew to a close, the network established by Mary Linnett's fatal obsession had become a permanent feature of the world's hidden landscape. The buildings that served as its physical anchors continued to function as ordinary residences and estates, their supernatural properties known only to those who possess the knowledge and sensitivity to perceive them. Yet beneath the surface of conventional reality, Mary's consciousness continued to guide the evolution of something that would forever alter the relationship between human civilization and the mysterious forces that shaped its destiny. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Sinister Memory. If you enjoyed today's investigation, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell to be alerted when we unveil our next dark chronicle. Share your thoughts about this case in the comments below. We read every single one, and your ideas often lead us to our next investigation. Until next time.